I just need to tell you before I read this morning's scripture, there is no place in the world that I would rather be than here this morning, watching the miracles happening in this congregation. 1 John chapter 3, 11 through 23. For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We must not be like Cain, who was from the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. Do not be astonished, brothers and sisters, that the world hates you. But we know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and refuses to help? I titled this sermon, How to Ruin Hospitality. On February the 13th, 328 years ago this coming Thursday, one of the greatest violations of hospitality in history occurred in the Highlands of Scotland. 30 members of the Clan MacDonald were murdered by 120 soldiers from the Clan Campbell on the orders of King William. I see another Scot nodding their head. I know this because I am of the Clan MacDonald. I knew it was going to happen one day. And on our honeymoon, Carol and I visited Glencoe, where the massacre occurred, where the laws of hospitality were broken, because if people came to you in need, in bad weather, as they traveled, you were responsible to take them in. And with an order from King William to leave no MacDonald alive, the Campbells knocked on the door. And to borrow the words of the song, they came in a blizzard, we offered them heat, a roof over their head, dry shoes for their feet. We wined them and dined them, they ate all our meat. And they slept in the house of MacDonald until midnight, when they got up and murdered the household. Obviously, many of us are not over this yet. But I done hold it again, yeah. I raise this because the issues of truly living out hospitality are incredibly difficult. They are risky. And sometimes people take advantage of the laws of hospitality. There is a fish called an anglerfish. Anybody ever heard of an anglerfish? An anglerfish has a little protuberance that looks like a worm, and it invites other fish in to dine. And then guess who lunch is? Even in nature, sometimes the invitation to hospitality goes wrong. And then we have our passages of Scripture that we heard today. And they are, I really appreciate your taking such a long passage and having this passage read in such a sweet and gentle voice made it even more powerful to me. You know, I could stand up here and scream that passage, but the truth is that Paul is saying you are ruining the hospitality of God. Now, in Paul's day, when they came to the Lord's Supper, they did not just have bread and wine. They had a meal. And people ate and visited in homes. And everybody brought food. It was like a Baptist potluck. And then toward the end, they would remember the Lord's Supper, and what was happening, according to those who study this, is you remember that many in the church were slaves, or indentured servants, or were poor. Well, those folks had to wait till they got off work before they could come. And the folks who had money were getting there early, were eating the best food, drinking all the wine, and they were loaded in fat by the time the other folks got there. And Paul said, this is not the way we do God's hospitality. And then he reminded them of the meal that marks hospitality for us, God's hospitality. And said, if your hospitality fails because of your greed, you eat this bread and drink this cup to your own detriment. John goes on to say, what kind of faith is it that does not care for your brother or sister? I read these, and almost every time I have heard these scriptures, somebody in the pulpit has been pointing their finger and scolding. Can I get an amen? But then I read them and I realized Paul and John were writing to Christians. They were writing to people who were struggling with what it means to live out God's hospitality, to live out their faith. And so we need to hear these passages as warnings, but also as the truth that all of us struggle with what it means to live out God's hospitality and welcome. So, someone mentioned that they really liked my tie. And I came in the door with Mary Ann this morning and reminded her, some of you have seen this tie before, and it wasn't on me when you saw it. It was on Mary Ann's late husband, Robert. And she gifted this to me. And I love this tie with the pictures of all the children on it, because it reminds me, when we think about hospitality, particularly in this country as we seek to welcome people here, how many people come to this country to ensure their children have a better life. And so if we can remember that, we might grow in our hospitality and our understanding. We might not hear these passages as being scolded and punishing us, but as calling us to a different way of being, a different way of living out our faith. And if you were sitting there listening to me this morning and you go, you know, I've kind of blown it. I've really messed up. I'm not a very welcoming person. I want to tell you a story about a man named Martin Niemöller in Germany during the rise of Hitler. And Niemöller was initially a supporter of Hitler, but he changed. He changed because he saw what the lack of welcome to people who were not Aryan was doing to the church and the nation. And Niemöller wound up in prison and was almost executed because he had this conversion experience in his life about what it meant to follow God in hospitality and love of his fellow human being. He was imprisoned at Dachau from 1938 to 1945. After his imprisonment, he expressed his deep regret about not having done enough to help the victims of Nazism. He became a leader in what was called the Confessing Church. And he wrote a poem that I bet everyone in this room has heard some version of. Let me read it to you. First they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. It is possible to hear the warning not as scolding, but as invitation. It is possible to hear in the words of Niemöller's poem an invitation to ensure that there is always someone to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. It is possible to hear in this that no matter what we have done, there is always the possibility for new life and hope and redemption. We come to this place as God's people struggling to live out our faith, to be the glue that helps put a broken world back together. And we come with our own brokenness. There is no one in this sanctuary who does not bring their brokenness with them, except for me, and we all know how perfect I am. You remember the Pinocchio commercial where he's, yeah. We all bring our brokenness. We all bring our guilt and regret and sins. But we all live out God's hospitality because we have first been welcomed into God's hospitality. You know how we say it. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because he first loved me. And that love carries us out into the world. And we become the arms and hands wrapping love around the world. Always in the back of our mind, remembering that we are not anglerfish. We are welcoming that others may know what we have known, the love and mercy of God. Amen.